Hey guys, back. Sorry, I skipped a week, but I had to set up a new desk, and now I have a new desk. Anyways, today I'm going to show you guys how to explode yet another thing, because I like exploding stuff. But this time entirely in geometry nodes, and I think it looks cool. It's a little bit different from what we did before with the head explosion. In this case, it's going to involve instances and keeping textures from instances. So let me show it to you. In fact, I'm going to show you a little clip of something I rendered out previously. This is one method that I used, and I'm going to show you two methods of how to animate this. But we'll start with now this scene. I built this scene pretty quickly using the wall factory that comes in with Blender. You need to activate this in the extra objects add-on. It comes default with Blender, so you should have it. But if you see here, we see like it's a stone hall thing being blown away. If I move this empty closer, more of it comes out. And of course, it's not perfect, could be adjusted furthermore, such as, with these curves that I placed here, we could continuously edit it. That is one method. If I look at it from inside, I think it looks pretty cool. Of exploding stuff, we can also control it from over here where its initial point is, just by adjusting a little bit the position value with the multiply. Of course, if it's 0, nothing will happen. And then we can also adjust the scale. So let's get into it. I'm going to show you guys how to create this and how to use one extra method using proximity node. So let's get started. In this scene, we want to, as I said, activate the extra add-on, the extra object add-on in the default in Blender. So with the extra objects add-on activated, we are going to Shift A, scroll down to extras. There's Beam Builder and Wall Factory. We're going to use Wall Factory. Now we're going to get a simple wall, but we want to actually curve this because it does take into account the position. So we're going to curve this. We're also going to adjust the thickness of the grout so that they overlap each other. And for fun, we're gonna add actually we're gonna remove an opening and put in slots, cause yes. And now we're going to adjust what we got. It's not honestly a lot of choices, but it works for our purposes. And now we are going to mirror this onto the other side. So using a simple mirror modifier, we're going to mirror it onto the other side, activate clipping. And then with an array modifier, we're going to slightly adjust it so that it's coming into each other and add one more. And there we have our hall. Let's put the origin into the geometry, add a simple floor, which is just a plane. And now applying the scale, I'm going to split my view here, go into my asset browser, and I'm going to use the Polyhaven add-on, which I will link below. A very useful add-on to have a bunch of HDRIs, models, and textures just already in Blender, ready to use whenever. So in this case, I'm going to bring in a brick texture. Let's just use the medieval block actually would look fine. We're going to put that there and that onto the floor. And if we switch to material view, we see the floor has it, but we need to go into edit mode for the bridge and give it a UV. So if we go quickly into UV editor, I use Cube Project. Let's adjust this. And that's fine. It doesn't have to really be perfect, to be honest. It's just gonna, if I hit render view, we don't even have an HDRI, so we don't have anything to show. Let's go back into the asset, go into the HDRI, find one we like. I'm going to pick, let's see how this one looks. Go into rendered view, use Control B to do this window thing. It's pretty useful. We are going to activate the denoise so I can see a bit clearer. Yeah, that works. I like that. All right, so now that we have our lighting set up and all that, we are going to start with the whole geometry nodes bit. So before we get directly into geometry nodes, we need to separate all of these groups. So I'm going to quickly move this into its own collection to stay organized. I'm going to hit Tab P and separate by loose parts. This is going to separate all the loose parts of the collection, so each individual brick, into its own object. Now, if we select the objects in here, we need to set all their origins into the geometry. So there we go. Now all of them have their own origin, and we're set to go. We can hide that now, and in the main collection, we are going to bring in a cube, add geometry nodes, call it blown away or something, and then get rid of that cube. We don't need it. Bring in the wall collection. We can keep it on original or relative, doesn't really matter. Plug that into the output, and we get our wall back. Now what we need to do is simply use a set position node. This is coming in as an instance, and before I used we would realize the instance so that it would play nicely with the set position and all that. But as I'm about to show you, if I realize the instance here, we lose the texture. Now this might get fixed in a coming update with the whole UV node and all that stuff, but for now I don't really see a way around it, and not one that's easy for me to implement right now. So sticking with the instances, we're going to use a vector math, set it to scale, and plug that into position. It's going to disappear into this corner, don't worry. We're going to put a position node into the vector, and now all the pieces separated based on their position, and they scale on 1. So now when we scale this, you see they scale uniformly. We're going to randomize this a little bit by using a vector math add, and we're going to add a random value node set to vector, and we're going to add that into the bottom field. Now, this is a vector going from 0 to 1. If we increase the max, you see it's going to start leaning to one side. We need to counteract that with the opposite value. So if we have 1, we need a -1. So let's reset that back to 0, because what we're going to do is we're going to do a vector combine XYZ. From this point, we're going to bring all of them into one socket, and then combine these into one socket. Actually, we don't even need that reroute. And now what we're going to do is in the minimum, we're going to do another vector math, set it to multiply -1, and now it's whatever the output we put here, it's going to multiply that by -1, and as we all know from basic math, anything multiplied by a negative number becomes a negative. A positive multiplied by a negative number becomes a negative. So now our bridge stays in place and it randomizes. Now we don't want this effect all the time, and this is gonna be more prevalent when I start adding proximity or the the empty node. So we are going to use actually a mix RGB out of all things. So set that there. Make sure it's set all the way to white. Since it starts at like this weird gray value, we want it set all the way to white. And now you can see we can switch between our default to our randomize. This is going to be incredibly useful for later for when we're connecting all sockets really into this factor. So keep that in mind. All right, after this, let's make some more space. We're going to mess with the scale. So we want to attach this scale into a noise texture, and let's multiply that so that it explodes. Yay! Let's set that to 4D so we have a little bit of control of randomness. And from there, we are going to do the same thing. Actually, we could just Shift D, copy this one onto the other one, and works the same way. If we quickly just set that to 1, we could see that like if we set factor to 1, it returns to its original position. Set it to 0, and it explodes. So you can start visualizing how we're going to use this to tell Blender which parts to explode and which parts to keep for a bit. So continuing on, you see that they're all exploding the same direction. So now we need to rotate them. So going to instance, rotate instance, we are going to use once again our handy friend, the random value node, plug that into rotation, set this to a random negative number and a random positive number. And now we are going to use once again our mix RGB, but this time we're going to set the output to black. You can see our bricks are now rotating into their default state. If they're one and 0, they are in their random state. I don't know exactly why this one has to be black, but I'm guessing it has to do with the fact that it's a float value. But then again, this is a float value, so I have no idea. But it works that way. Okay, now that we have our basic setup preparing for the exploding part, we're now going to tell Blender which parts to explode. So let's quickly just set everything back to 1 so that I can see a bit better. Okay. So the first method I'm going to show you guys is the proximity node. Now this is the easiest to set up, but sort of the hardest to control due to a flaw in the proximity node itself. It's a bit janky, but it can work. So what we're gonna do is in the collection, we're going to bring in a cube, or really whatever geometry you want. In the visibility, we're going to set it to wire and also remove all other visibility from the render. Alright, so removing all visibility from the render, we are now going to bring this into geometry nodes. So now that we have the cube in here, we're going to set it to relative so that it moves around in space. And now we are going to bring in our proximity node. Quickly plug that into the target, and the distance this is where now we're going to plug it into all of the factors. So 1 factor, come on, 1 factor, do a little split there, 2, come on, stop being weird, and then the third one all the way over here. And you can see we're exploding already. In fact, I lost my cube. Oh, okay, I'm dumb. I accidentally brought in the regular cube. I need to bring in cube 001. And with that, we see now it's cutting through our object and exploding it into its variances. Now, we are going to have to adjust those variances ever so slightly. So mess around a bit with the value here. So a random, we could even add more faces onto here. But you'll see the flaw already. Inside of the proximity node, it doesn't count the faces anymore. There's no volume on the proximity node, so it just takes the edges or the points or yeah. So it doesn't really truly does the proximity bit. So what you need to do is sort of hack it with a map range and adjust it so that the range is a little bit bigger than the actual geometry. And even then, it's going to be a little bit hard to control. And you can see back here, some of the geometry wants to go back, sort of loop. So just increase the size, increase the amount of randomness, mess with the multiply. And then here we go. You see it comes in and explodes. However, it can still be finicky, so you gotta adjust it all the time, depending on your scene, of course. Now, you can also do some more, mess around a bit more. If we do, let me see, if we do vector math, set that to multiply. Oh, nope, that doesn't work. Okay, so this is method one, using a proximity node, and we could basically, the easiest setup. It's very good for stills too. And you just want to mess around a lot with the settings just to find the one you like. And if you see here, as things go out, they kind of reset into their they don't rotate anymore, and that's because they reached their maximum here. So like there's a couple ways you can go around that. One of them is to add a input scene time and put the frames into the max and the minimum, do some math stuff so that when you animate it, it takes into account the and constantly changes the minimum and maximum based on the timeline. Uh, that's one way to constantly animate it based off of a constant motion. If you're just looking for stills though, you don't really need to do that. You just kind of, yeah, this is chaotic enough so that no one really can tell that the ones in all the way in the back are already like reset or standing still. All right, so that's method one of proximity. And now we're going to go into method two, slightly more complicated, but not so much that it's impossible. So let's hide this up here. Bring this up here. What we are going to need is an empty. So let's bring in an empty sphere. Here we are. Now let's name this target so that we don't lose it. And now we are going to bring that into our node network, set it to relative. We need to do some vector math here, so let's bring this into subtract, this into divide. We want to subtract our location of the empty by the position of the object, so like that. Location goes at the bottom. And then we want to divide that result from the scale, so the scale of it also controls it. And now we want to do a combine XYZ, set this into X so that when it only affects it if it moves on the X axis. If we want it to affect the Y, obviously set it to Y, blah, blah, blah. And then from here, we can plug this into let's say here, and you'll see we get something. As we move it around the X, it explodes. And then we can, where did I plug this into? Here it is. Use a float to curve node to further adjust it. So if we see starts to float here, we can just adjust it a little bit here. We could also unclip this, set this to 10, reset our view, and actually let's keep it clipped just so it doesn't go too far. And then we can continue to adjust it more drastically. There we go. It does throw it till you see a sort of wall kind of thing. So move around the X, it starts to explode. If we want to change this original position, what we need to do is do a vector math, set it here, move it to multiply, and then we start messing around with the XYZ, and we can see we are affecting essentially the rotation of each axis. Now, what's beneficial about this method is you can do a float curve essentially for each of these. So we can actually get rid of this, cut these off, and only have this float curve affect this this plug here, which affects the randomness of it. So if you see here, this only affects the random. And then all we need to do to add more, duplicate that, put into X, bring in another float curve, plug that into the value, and then plug that into our next one. So over here into this is the one that explodes it. And then from here we can adjust this individually from the other one and this one. And then we could do it one more time for the rotation, because there's not enough rotation for my taste. So let's see, these are what's being rotated right now. We could also set this value to affect the min and max here, so this will change the min and max, so do that, put that there. Another thing we can do is if we do a location keyframe and just, you know, animate this like properly going through, add another location keyframe, and just play it. We could edit it while it's being affected. I wonder what happens if I just skip the float curve altogether for rotation. That's interesting. So that's the beauty of this, of just like experimenting around. I think I've said that like in every tutorial because truly I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just messing around and seeing what happens. And so really my purpose for creating this was mostly for still renders, not so much for animations, but if it works for you, it works. If you can make it better, even better. I mean, that in its own way is pretty cool. Makes me wonder what happens if I just remove all of them. Okay, yeah, that works. So you don't even have to add the floats. You can if you want to, but I like this look better. Pretty cool. So you can see, just messing around, we get a bunch of different results. There's no one answer, and while the proximity is good if you want a certain section to be blown up. I like this method better is if I'm animating or making a general adjustment. So like this is pretty good for wanting to blow up this hallway because it's a straight shot and seeing this is really satisfying. So I hope it's as satisfying for you guys too. Uh, I will probably see. I went on a tangent for a while here and a lot of blank spaces, but I hope you guys learned something and I hope that this is somewhat useful to you. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial and have a good one. Bye bye.